all, welcome to the Royal Society of Edinburgh and the Scotland 2026 Roundtable on Who Gets to Belong. And my name is Dr. Kevin Guyan. I work as a researcher and a writer at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm being the chair for today's session. My work looks very broadly at the experiences of LGBTQ communities in Scotland and the UK, particularly ideas about data and how we count different marginalised and minoritised groups. And these are all very timely topics as we reach the end of the year, the end of 2025, and go maybe excitingly into a new year, an election year in Scotland with Holyrood elections coming up in May 2026. So today, while we're all gathered at this roundtable, we're going to be exploring who feels included in Scotland's future and who remains on the margins. What are the systems and structures that create these divides? And importantly, action focus, what can we all do in response to this? So across all of our work, and it's been exciting for me to come into the room and see all the different name tags, see where people are coming from today, we're going to be thinking about how we kind of navigate these big challenges and how we respond to these issues shaping our times. We're going to be thinking about things such as the multiple and intersectional effects of inequalities on our everyday lives. We're going to be thinking about the polarisation and the mobilisation of the far right in Scotland and the wider UK, conspiracy theories, the media, and how we make sense of the world around us, global unrest, war and genocide, and our individualisation or the lack of connections, among others. So big topics, and I hope we'll touch on some of these themes in our conversation today. I also, though, don't want us to lose sight of the many wonderful things that are around us, the many wonderful aspects of living and working in Scotland today, including that sense of feeling connected through resistance, feeling connected through solidarity, benefiting from the amazing developments we've seen across tech and science, being surrounded by nature and art and culture, and the positive impacts of being part of community. So, big talking points ahead this afternoon. So, having hopefully set out some of the scene for today's discussion, I want to get into some of the details about how this will work. I'm sure for many of you, this is a brand new format. And for me, I've never chaired something quite as large. It feels like I'm a kind of prime minister at a cabinet table right now. So we're going to set out some rules for how this will hopefully work in the most efficient and effective way. So as you can see, we have a very full table. We are also streaming online right now as well. And how I'd like us to do things, rather than going around the table and offering introductions, what I instead propose is that when you make your first contribution, if you can just say a very quick, hello, I am, a few words on your background and expertise before making your first point. That'll save us a 30 minutes round the table round of introductions. I'm also very keen for everyone to be able to contribute to today's discussion. So it'd be great if before making a point, you can pop up your hands and I'll call you into the conversation. That'll mean that those in my sideline don't get preferential treatment, and I'll be able to hopefully bring all views into the discussion today. Also, with a large group, I just want to say, please don't feel obliged. You have to contribute to everything. There might be some talking points where actually you just want to sit back and listen, and that's also perfectly fine. Don't feel like you have to say something just because you're sat around the table for everything that we cover. I also encourage you very, very strongly, please feel free to rock the boat. It'll make a far more lively, interesting discussion if we're not all on the same page. So be contrarian, be different, be difficult. Feel free to bring in your own expertise and experience. It also obviously goes without saying that contributions that are dehumanising or oppressive are not acceptable. As I highlighted earlier, we are being live streamed right now on YouTube, so keep that in mind for any contributions that you bring to the conversation. They are going beyond this room. One final thing I want to add is that there is opportunities for those who are joining us online to contribute to the discussion. So if you're online right now listening in and you have a comment or a question, please pop it in the chat, and my colleague from the RSC will be able to bring this into the discussion. So I hope you feel included as part of the conversation this afternoon. Very finally, in terms of the logistics, we've split the session into two halves. So we're going to speak for about 40 minutes. We'll then have a short break, time to recharge, teas and coffees, before coming back for the second part of the session. And again, about 40 minutes we'll have in the second part. I'm also going to provide an opportunity at the end of the discussion for any concluding remarks. If you have any nice concluding things you'd like to sum up, there'll be an opportunity at the end of today's discussion. Okay, that's enough for me. I have hopefully set the scene, set out how things will work. And I want to jump into the discussion, why we're all here today. And as highlighted, these are big questions, these are big themes. I'm particularly keen to hear from your own expertise, experience, the work of your organisation, your background, and there are no right or wrong answers to any of these discussions. And I want to start with a big kind of general question that hopefully everyone in some shape can kind of contribute to. And that's around what you see as maybe the most pressing concern right now in Scotland when it comes to issues of inclusion and representation. So in your work, in your expertise, in your experience, what do you see as the most pressing issue around inclusion and representation? Who wants to kick things off? Who wants to be the first contributor? Yes.
This is less research-based, but perhaps anecdotal, but I've had massive modules at the university. Sorry, I'm Corey Brown-Swan from the University of Stirling. I've had massive modules this term. And I think one of the things that I left teaching, having spent the terms teaching Scottish politics, that left me quite uneasy was a sense of absolute disengagement of young people. There are students who should be very much engaged in politics. They're taking a politics honors module. They have no sense of engagement, or if they do, it's very much rooted in a sense of dissatisfaction, disillusionment. They can tell me all sorts of things about the New York City mayoral contest, but they can tell me very little about what's happening day to day within Holyrood. And I do wonder if that's a result of kind of increasingly polarized space where they're getting their news from, thus the interest in the mayoral race, but also a lack of outreach, a lack of a sense that politics has something to do with them. And if that's quite something that felt so profoundly within quite a privileged environment, a university classroom, how is politics reaching people who don't have that access, don't have those privileges?
And it was interesting you mentioned the New York mayoral election. Was there anything, what about that charged your students? What excited them about what was happening there?
I think mostly the TikTok presence. That's where they were getting it from, but they felt like, and I kind of challenged them on this because we were talking about what makes an effective campaign, thinking ahead to 2026, how would they want to be spoken to? And they said, well, this is da, da, da. And they seemed to think that there was not someone who was speaking to them, someone who was representing their concerns, their issues.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Mar. I am the policy and research lead for the Young Women's Movement. We are a national organisation for young women's rights and political representation in Scotland. And I just wanted to speak to that point because it really resonates with our research. So we did some large-scale research last year, and we showed that 1 in 2 young women told us they did not trust politicians to represent them, and 58% said that they thought they had no role at all in the decisions that were being made about their lives. So our data and our experience of working with young women definitely resonates with that idea of perhaps a disillusionment. I'm maybe gonna contradict slightly the part about engagement, because the women that we work with are hugely engaged and they're interested and they want to be part of the conversation. So I think that there's a will, but there's also a feeling of kind of defeat across the board, which is what we need to kind of fight against in the lead up to the election, but also after that. And I guess a second concern for us, and specifically for young women, is the rise of misogyny, the rise of violence against young women, both online, but also in the streets and even in sites of power. So the violence that women politicians or women that are important roles in their communities are experiencing it really detracts young women for wanting to take on those roles, because it's just kind of putting themselves at risk. So yeah, I would say for me, absolutely agree with that sentiment, but also misogyny is another big problem we've got to challenge.
Thank you, Mark. Anything else from people's work in terms of inclusion, representation? What are you seeing in your kind of activities of who's feeling kind of marginalised or not part of the conversation?
If I could just jump on to that point, my name is Noam Hatzel. I'm a researcher at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm just completing a research project on Scottish nationalism and ethnic minority Christians. And I've got some personal interest in migration as well. Just kind of what you were saying about misogyny kind of made me think about the fact that within Christian circles right now, there's a big report that came out called The Quiet Revival, and it's about people are coming back to faith, back to Christianity. And there was a recent BBC article about how a lot of people, young men in particular, are coming back to churches of England, not necessarily because they found Jesus' salvation only way of being, but perhaps because they want to align themselves with an institution that is English over and against, other foreign influences, which then kind of lines up quite, unfortunately, very neatly with the misogyny that your research is showing as well, because there's a particular type of person that they would want to see in their churches, particular type of person they want to see in their leadership, particular type of Christianity that they see as unfortunately being able to justify misogyny, racism, transphobia, et cetera, which is something that I think, so in my research, I'm looking at Christian nationalism, I'm looking at ideas around Christianity, nation states, all that kind of stuff. And obviously we're seeing around the world that that's unfortunately on the rise. So I think just kind of back and jumping off of that point, it just made me think about what I'm researching.
Thank you.
So I'm Professor Makara. I'm Professor at the Law School, University of Edinburgh, and also Director of the Institute for Advanced Studies in Humanities, and I'm a criminologist, so I do a lot of work about young people actually in crime. And I just want to pick up when both you were saying about marginalisation, and there's a real issue about gender-based violence in Scotland, and it's increasing as far as we know in terms of police recorded crime, 45% increase in number of sexual assaults over the last 10 years, and domestic abuse is also rising too by 53% since they've started recording it. So there's a real background here, sort of background of misogyny, of violence that many young women and men too are actually facing. And that, I think that is something that is extremely marginalising and makes people less want to take part in public life. We've got a colleague at Edinburgh University, Claire Houghton, who's doing research on Equally Safe when she's trying to look at safe spaces for people on social media. And that's a really important piece of research. But there is a kind of broader cultural issue around misogyny and gender-based violence that we really need to face up to. Otherwise, there will be extreme marginalisation. And linked to that, I think there's also the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic and how that's affected young people. We have research that shows that mental health issues around young people have massively increased. There's been something like over 505%, 50% rise in clinical levels of depression amongst young people. Anxiety has increased as well. And the adolescent mental health services are really very sparse on the ground. And that, again, is something that's really marginalising for young people. They feel really disaffected, disconnected. And some of the violence that we're seeing is sometimes attributed to that violence to others and also to self.
It's good to see already these kind of connections and threads coming out in the conversation. Nick
Watson, Professor of Disability Research at the University of Glasgow. I don't want to turn this into an exclusion Olympics, but I think there's we're seeing the same with people with learning disability, particularly around being victims of hate crime. And what we did, about 90% of people with learning disability regularly experience hate crime in their lives. And I think that leads to huge exclusion. And one of the issues that I think is really emerging that we're seeing now is that the third sector organisations that have worked with and helped bring in these organisations are facing real cutbacks and real problems with getting secure funding, because they get funding, but the funding is often, on the chair of a couple of large organisations of disabled people, and you receive the funding in March for next April, and it's just no way to plan, and there's a lack of security. So I think that in a way we've got both the individuals feeling excluded, but those organisations that are closest to the communities that people live in and can work best to help bring them in are facing these are under such straitened times that it's really hard for them to provide the services that they should be able to provide. And I think if I was to, you know, if we're looking at the next election, the thing that I would be saying to the Scottish government, if you wanted, is the lesson of COVID was that the third sector stepped in and saved the groups that are most excluded. And then immediately after COVID, they had their grants cut. And if, you know, it is these organisations that can help to tackle, that can help bring people back together again, and can help to tackle or to get people more engaged with the political process and so on. And I think there's a real need to, if it's thinking about where we go next, is to say that the third sector show us a way of bringing this, of tackling the problems that we're seeing.
Contribution, yes.
Hi, I'm Leah Duncan-Cream. I'm the Policy and Influencing Lead at One Parent Family Scotland. So not to make the discussion too children, young people focused, but I think as we look towards the election, it's actually really important that children, young people, and particularly children, are included in discourse, because with the exception of 16, 17-year-olds, they're not voters, but actually getting social policy right for children, young people is absolutely critical. So in 2017, the Scottish Parliament passed the Child Poverty Act, which said that by 2030, 10% or less of children in Scotland should be growing up in relative poverty. At the moment, though, what we see in terms of who isn't included in that discourse, we have a lot of conversations about universalism and about how we tackle child poverty as a broader issue. But within that, the kind of action, the delivery plan for what that looks like, you have single parent families, families with a baby under one, families with a disabled child, a bit larger families, ethnic minority families, and I'm going to forget the other one off the top of my head. But we have 6 priority families that identified as being at higher risk of poverty. So in 2024, 22% of all children were living in relative poverty, 36% of single parent families, and then similar if not higher for families with a baby under one, for ethnic minority families. And we know that the different barriers to addressing poverty for these groups look very different. For example, for ethnic minority communities, we know that uptake of entitlements to social security are significantly lower than they should be. And really one of the interventions there is about like community-centred, person-centred, culturally appropriate income maximisation to kind of tackle some of the stigma surrounding that and ensure that people are receiving what they're entitled to. But then you have single parent families, and actually some of the barriers there are really pervasive. So you're not looking at necessarily income alone, because if you're a single parent with a 5-year-old who has additional support needs, you might have a work requirement that you have to work 30 hours a week, but your child needs you to come to school because they don't have the provision that they need because they have additional support needs and they need extra support. So you can't meet that work requirement. So you struggle to access your entitlements to social security. And then that's a small part of it. And then you're looking at like knock-on impacts on other benefits and navigating this hugely complex landscape of employment versus childcare versus school. And it becomes a full-time job just to navigate what really is your right.
Thank you. Yes, Hayley.
Thanks. I'm Hayley Bennett, the University of Edinburgh. And just to build on what both Leah and Nick have said there, I think the question about who is marginalised or not included or excluded is also a question of how do people participate in society. And I think that's what both of you have actually talked about, or how I would see inclusion as a form of participation. And like, do we have the systems and structures that enable people to participate in society, which then may lead them to participate in politics in a very formal sense and be represented in formal politics, but there's everyday politics as well. And I think at the moment, my view and research would show that I think we've got to such a residual form of a welfare state that doesn't enable people, so people get so little money that they actually can't participate in the basics of society. They can't join in social events, engage in civil society activities. There's a requirement for third sector organisations to find funding to create the spaces and places that actually, for a good, healthy society, should already exist in different ways. And I don't like the phrase the third space, but you know, that kind of discourse around, is there a third space for different groups? And I think that is probably the enduring issue for Scotland generally, that we've had such a prolonged austerity approach to the welfare state, to society, across the UK, not just Scotland, that you end up with single parents in these very difficult situations. If you can't generally every day participate in society, it's a big ask to then
be fully represented and able to participate in politics. And I think that's probably what would be the big issue. How do we reinvest in the welfare state and public services more broadly that creates a more equal grounding and stops the marginalisation? People don't choose to be marginalised. People are placed in positions that exclude them from various types of workplaces and civil society and social spaces. So yeah.
No, thank you. I think which is helpful also, yeah, kind of zoom out and think about those systems, those structures, those means and methods of participation. And before moving on to the next question, I did want to ask, because I've spoken quite a lot about young people, children, from the Third Age Trust, for kind of older people, are they feeling included and represented? Are they feeling excited about the next election?
I think that's I was just sitting thinking that we were, Liz Irvine from the Third Age Trust and also from the Third Age Trust, which you may or may not have heard of, work with, it's a self-help kind of organisation which works with people who are in retirement, etc. In one sense, we're a privileged generation. We're told that often, we're the boomers, we're this and we're that. And that's okay if you're on the right side if you're on the winning team, as I would always say. If you're not there and if you're not getting an occupational pension and if you don't own your own home and you're just living on the state pension, and dare I say it, if you're female, I suspect that life isn't quite so rosy. And I'm not sure that I do feel certain older people do feel marginalised. And that's and a lot depends on health issues, transport, housing, money, and how that looks. And I suspect that many do not trust our political leaders at this moment in time, no matter what political party they're in. So I do feel that they feel marginalised. For example, in Scotland, I think I'm right in saying that the Commissioner for Older People doesn't exist anymore, which it did before. And so I do feel we're just slightly invisible. And I think the pandemic didn't do any favours in that respect for older people. I don't know if you've been into
I think there's many older people frightened about their future. Again, as Liz and I, we're lucky. We're teachers. We have professional pensions, and we have a very nice retirement. Thank you very much. But I think if I didn't have that pension, if I was living on my own, I would worry about who cares for me when I'm sick. Am I well treated when I'm sick because I'm 75? Am I discriminated against because I'm 75? Does anybody listen to people of our age? Or do they all think that we're taking the money and taking resources and sort of taking over? We vote. Our generation does vote. We've always voted. And so that's why they court us and why the triple dot pension is still there. But I think there's tremendous fear. There's tremendous, are we acceptable as society? Or are we just a burden on society? And many older people feel a burden, which is a shame because we have a huge amount to offer. A lot to offer.
I want to add something. I don't know if that's related, but I have many things in my mind. The first of the misogyny. I thought the only misogyny exists in my home country, in Yemen. I'm from Yemen, I'm a visual artist. And yesterday I was just awarded the Arab Personality of the Year. And unfortunately, there is misogynist comments about what did I do, why I look like this, why I wear like this instead of what I did. I mean, if I was a man, that will be different conversation. And unfortunately here, when I stand here, also I see about the media, about the refugees and the different pressure. So me sitting here at the table, feel a little bit anxiety, being a woman and a refugee at the same time, in a country that these days doesn't, like this, So inclusion actually also in the terms of creative people in doing the policy making, we don't see them. You see them only in festivals and in a cheerful way, but we're not included in the structure of the policy making. For example, in education, in NHS or something, creative spaces, we don't see them, and this is unfortunately. This is why we are undervalued as whenever there is something with the country, financial barriers or something, they blame the creative industry, and then they reduce the fund from the creative because we are an extra, not an essential part of the yeah.
Thank you. And congratulations on that award as well. I want to continue this conversation and get a little bit more into details now and think more about kind of what Haley you were saying about the structures, the systems, a bit more about the kind of particulars of how people are enabled or constrained from engaging. So I'm keen to hear in your work, in your kind of experiences and activities, what have you seen in terms of these more specific structure systems that enable or constrain people's ability to get involved?
So I do a lot of work in the kind of poverty space, as I'm sure you'd imagine, and I think there's a lot of discourse in the Scottish Government, and actually not Scottish Government, but across the UK about what participation looks like and what it should look like. But actually, if you're talking about a single parent who can't afford the bus to get to the library, to have access to a computer, to apply for jobs, then the first thing on their mind isn't what participation looks like. So we put a lot of time and thought into actually how you support meaningful participation that isn't exploitative. And I think that's really a big part of it. Is it's not come in, we're going to ask you lots of questions about a topic that's difficult and potentially quite traumatic, because poverty is traumatic for families. We're not just going to come in, ask you these questions, say, thanks, off you go, and there's no follow-up, and there's no, well, what's the outcome from this? And that's where the conversation ends. So there's a lot of conversation in the third sector and with the Scottish Government about what meaningful participation looks like, and that's following up and saying, well, this is what we're going to take forward. This is how we're using your views. We're going to have a relationship-based practice where we're going to do it over a number of sessions, and you get something out of it as well. And it's definitely an ongoing learning process. I think not all spaces are there yet. But particularly, as I say, when we talk about poverty, there's really that risk that if you don't do it well, it becomes quite exploitative.
Conscious of the periphery vision to my left. In terms of the kind of the particulars, in terms of engagement, disengagement, in terms of your work, so is there anything that has kind of come to mind in the conversation so far?
Yeah, so I'm Annie Webster from the University of Edinburgh, and my research looks at storytelling practices and creative practices more broadly amongst refugees who've been settled in Scotland. And part of what attracted me to that project was the New Scots Refugee Integration Strategy, which is so distinctive and has really been hailed as a model across Europe of best inclusive practice. And part of that strategy has a real focus on multilingualism. So, embracing different languages, building on Scotland's multilingual kind of history in that sense. But when I've actually got to doing the research, access to language lessons, to English as a foreign language, is just so hard to come by. And, part of that has been coming out of COVID. The provision of that online has been moved online and kind of never quite shifted back to in person. So it's about just the very basic kind of pragmatics of inclusion, access to learning languages in that way is a really key, something.
In the sense of bringing things back to basics. And also, when prepping notes for today, I'm surprised how frequently COVID has come up in discussion already. That is not something I forecast in such a kind of talking point. So is there any other contributions around kind of these systems, these structures, these kind of more kind of concrete things which are working or not working to enable?
I would say the U3A, the Third Age Trust, works really well. It's a wonderful model. It's a corporate model. There's no leaders as such. We all work together. It costs very little. And because we've got so much experience, so much wealth experience, we have wonderful groups and organizations happening. Our main problem, though, is that we're middle class. So how do we attract, now it's low cost, how do we attract other people and middle class people into our organization? Middle class white, I might add as well. So we want to attract a diverse group into our organization, which I think is very successful. But we're not being successful, are we, Liz? We're trying.
We try, but I think we've failed is the wrong word, but we haven't succeeded to attract people of more diverse population.
And do you have any sense? What are the barriers? So any sense of what
confidence? It's confidence. If you're a middle class woman, you can walk into a room and say hello. If I'm not a middle class woman and I walk in and I see this group of people with professor this and doctor this and somebody else that, I'm going to walk back out again very quickly. So it's building that confidence and reassuring people that they have something to offer and everybody's welcome. How do we do that? We're still struggling to find out, and we still remain white middle class.
Yes.
I think, to pick up on the point Hayley made, I think that one of the problems with the welfare state is that giving people the support and the money to participate or to become participants, and this is where I think what works well in my experience of my research are cash transfers. Rather than giving people services, it's cash transfers, like direct payments of some form or other. And I mean, they're not enough at the moment. They're not generous enough, but in things like access to work, it's the cash transfer that enables disabled people to work, and it's cash transfers in other across other sectors that help people participate. And if things like mobility allowance, without that, people can't get into the community and can't drive. And I think what was very successful for young people was things like the free bus pass, which has been really helpful to get people in. But then at 22, lots of people still don't have money, and that the free bus runs out, so they can't get to access the public spaces. So it becomes an expense and a way to stop. And I understand that there has to be some way of running and paying for a bus service, but it's that sort of thing that helps giving people, making participation easier and removing the costs from it is a real issue.
Which is something concrete and something that can be done. It's not just a vague idea.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've been part of a Scottish Government working group on antisocial behaviour, and we did a lot of consultation, over 200 groups. We were community groups, we consulted around this, and antisocial behaviour is going down, but it's concentrated in certain areas. And that's one of the things that actually really inhibits people from participating in anything in the community, and particularly older people who become victims of antisocial behaviour, and people from minoritized ethnic communities, gypsy trapper communities. They've now stopped reporting hate crime because it's just a normal part of their everyday life. And what we saw in that research that we did for the report was that community infrastructure, as it is collapsing across Scotland, that the austerity over the last 10 years meant that leisure services, basic things in communities that bring communities together, that young people can use, old people can use, that's all just disintegrating. And that means that kind of the nature of what a community is, or how a community could mobilise, how people can feel safe in a community and participate, those sorts of things have disappeared. It's concentrated in certain areas and around areas of high levels of poverty. And what I also see from another bit of research we do, which is looking at sort of geographical maps of Edinburgh and concentrations of deprivation, what you find is that in those sorts of communities, everything is really difficult. So that the areas of concentrated violence, police recorded violence is on those areas, high levels of school exclusion, high levels of people going to prison. So there are areas across Scotland with limited community infrastructure who then get stuck in poverty, and nothing seems to change that. And that is something that if we don't tackle, it will be very pernicious over the longer term. Thank you. Cassie.
Yeah, my name is Casey Smith. I'm a researcher at IPPR Scotland. And just immediately responding to what Leslie had to say there, I think this might be a bit of anecdotal. I've also been looking into this matter, which is municipal disintegration.
Can I just ask that you speak up just a little bit?
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. So I've been looking into the matter of municipal disintegration. Basically, what I'm referring to there is like high streets which are feeling kind of let down and a depressed state, litter. Empty bandstands. The fact that I'm from Falkirk and it's just wandering down the high street is quite depressing. It feels increasingly like it's these high income areas, like your Stockbridges, places. They can afford to have like a strong civic culture and civic life. Like the community gardens are tended to, like walls are painted, graffiti is absent, and it's cumulative effect for people who are living in these more underserved communities, and it goes without saying that the willingness to engage in a more active role in civic life, because they look around them and it's kind of like a broken windows effect that casino needs to go on.
Yeah, and just the image of that kind of abandoned bandstand.
Yeah.
Is a really resonant idea of it. Anna.
Hi, Anna Stefaniak. I'm a social psychologist and I work at the University of St Andrews. I'm going to start with a caveat. I am a fairly new transplant to Scotland, so I feel very underqualified to speak about what is happening here. But I do have a couple points. One is about the fact that the research, not mine, but the research that I'm quite aware of, shows that people from marginalized, disadvantaged communities tend to be super sensitive to any cues of a lack of belonging. And I think this is one of the things that we need to understand if we want people to participate, for instance, right? If you come from groups that are just accepted in those spaces and they feel like they're accepted, even if they're in an ambiguous situation where, you come to a room, you don't know anybody, right? You will tend to interpret that situation as, being accepting of you. Whereas we know that people of color, people from diverse backgrounds, people with disabilities, any kind of characteristics that differ them from this sort of mainstream society, they would tend to interpret those same cues as showing, you don't belong here. And then they would be more likely to withdraw from those spaces. There is some research showing that there are interventions, even brief, that can help that. So that was done primarily in academic contexts where, for instance, students of color would participate in a 1-hour session where they were told that this is how it operates, right? Just making it sort of more conscious. And then evidence showed that throughout their college experience, and then years later, they would show better outcomes than those who were not in those even very brief interventions. And the second thing on community participation, this is anecdotal evidence. So I've always lived in large cities, and this is the first time ever for me where I live in a very small community. So I live in a village of, I want to say 600 people now, very, very small, where the local community is so incredibly active. And it is, I don't think it's an underprivileged community, but there is definitely wide income distribution. And the community strives to engage people from sort of different level of affluence as well. There are many events. The community came together and bought the pub. So now the pub in the village is community owned. There are events throughout the day that are aimed for the community where people can come and, have lunch for £2, not for 20, right? So that everybody can participate. And this makes a huge difference for us as immigrants and newcomers to the community because we were also invited to participate. But I think it also makes a huge difference to the people who live in the community because these are also open to everybody. And I know it's hard to do, large scale, but I think the point here is that these interventions can be very effective when they're at a community level and a lot harder to implement where they are at a sort of very high up state level.
Yeah, it's just nice to hear some positive stories about it working. Taylor.
We worked together a while ago on What Works Scotland, which was a big project. And actually, there's lots of that project talked about community anchor organisations and the role that community plays. I think one thing, so my own research, I research lots of working age people, low income, precarious work, generally about employment support and social security. But through that, you hear stories and lives around what else they can't participate in and how the relationships change. Sometimes when I hear the stories of communities that work, all I picture is the invisible labour of the women, often, making those communities work. And one of the reasons why there's fewer resources or fewer community activities in less well-off neighbourhoods is that those women are still in paid work. So you talk about the generation, this pitching of generations, but actually working class people in the boomer generation often are still in work and are caring up and caring down, particularly women, so caring for elderly parents and for children and grandchildren. So if we build a society that the only way our communities thrive is through unpaid labour and the voluntary work, often of women. It's not always women, but often retired people and women. Then there's always going to be disadvantage with those neighbourhoods where people still have to work and work in precarious work. Actually, there's a big increase in men and women, low-income workers. The Wimpole project, which is a Glasgow Women in Multiple Paid Labour Market, Wimpole, which is a Glasgow University project, shows the pressures the social security system puts on low-income women to take more and more hours in precarious work, cleaning hotels in the morning, being a dinner lady at lunchtime, doing other kinds of care work. And there's no way then we can keep asking those individuals to hold our communities together. There has to be, I also appreciate that voluntary work is a good thing, but there has to be space in our welfare systems to have paid work, to value it enough to say this should be paid and valued, and this is important. And actually, some communities cannot backfill when austerity has cut these services, and we shouldn't be expecting, and if we are expecting them, we can't be pushing them in the labour market to take on more and more hours for minimum wage jobs. We can't have both. That isn't actually an answer to your question, which is what can we do? I'll just go on another rant.
Definitely, very helpful. Thank you for the kind of contribution so far. I want to take us down a side path. We'll come back to the main topic in a bit, but I'm interested, so the banner for this kind of first session is around inclusion and representation. And my work on LGBTQ communities often kind of presents a critique of some of these ideas about being included, being represented, being seen, being visible, how the intentions are often good, the intentions are often very positive, but sometimes, for a variety of reasons, the reality of it can be harmful. It can be extractive, as we were saying, Leah, it can be quite exploitative. So I'm keen to hear in your experiences how, whether inclusion and representation are the objectives that we should be aiming for, or whether it's part of a broader package, whether inclusion, being represented, being counted, is the be-all and end-all, or actually, are there harms associated with that, particularly for minoritized communities, and that we should be speaking more about?
I mean, yes, that is a short answer. So I would say that, this is a trap that I think we fell on, this representation trap, quite a few years back. And I think we are digging ourselves out of it at this point. We've realized that having a seat at the table isn't everything, or it isn't enough, that we really need, as a lot of colleagues were saying already, we need to meet people's needs and we need to allow them to thrive in their everyday lives before they can meaningfully take part in conversations and be part of decisions that are made about their lives. So obviously, absolutely, just being part of conversations, having a quota on a committee or a steering group, which I know we're all well aware of, it doesn't do enough. It's often tokenistic. It often comes with a lot of strings attached in terms of the resource and the time that's put into specific projects. So what we really need is enough time to build relationships and to build trust and to allow people to feel safe to even just kind of share what their realities are. And then once we're at that point, then would be at a better place to maybe make decisions together. But I think what I really want to say is that what we need to change are these decision-making structures, and we need to change them drastically because they've not been put in place with young women in mind or older people in mind, or they've been created by a very specific subset of the population, and we're just trying to fit everyone else in there, and it's just not working, right? So I think we need to radically change the system itself, the policymaking system, the decision-making structures. It's a big, big project. I'm not too sure I could just now tell you how to do that, but I think that perhaps the first step is a cultural change that allows us to differentiate tokenistic, kind of consultation-y type processes from true, real collaboration. And that allows us the time and the resources that we need to make it happen.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm nodding my head, this idea of kind of more than just tinkering around the edges, more of a radical change. Yes.
I completely agree. I also think that it's really important that we point out that inclusion and access are not the same thing. Because it might be fine to say we want to make sure that these different groups are represented, but actually if you have geographical limitations or physical barriers, geographical barriers, financial barriers, or actually it just makes someone's life a bit harder to participate, then you didn't do it well, and you didn't do it in a way that was meaningful. So actually, I think sometimes we need to realise that we think of those as the same meaning and they're actually not the same thing, and doing it well means that it has to be both.
I'll say something. Just thinking out loud here, I'm interested, I was glad that you brought up the New Scots language, because a recent project that I did got a prop, so probably it's was looking at migrant churches in Edinburgh, and we were kind of thinking about a lot of the time when we talk about Christianity in Scotland, it's all about language of decline, but actually our research found that there are over 80 migrant ethnic and minority diaspora churches in Edinburgh alone, and other research has shown that this is increasing. And a lot of the time when we talk about inclusion and access, the question has to become about who is inviting who and what authority do they have to invite who to the table, right? The New Scots language I kind of pick up on because it tends to frame migrants and refugees as something that, you are welcome into Scotland. You're being we are hospitable to you, we are hosting you, a guest, and also kind of frames them purely as people who can contribute economically or socially or culturally, but that's a very extractive process and it doesn't take their participation on their own terms. And I think we can extrapolate that to other various minority and marginalised groups as well. It's about who's asking who to participate and what terms of those, what other, who's dictating the terms of those participation. Sorry, as you were saying, if it makes life, someone's life harder, why would they be interested? Why would they want to kind of expose themselves to something that could be quite, difficult, emotional, traumatic, etc., etc.
Just picking up on that, there's also people who's at the table. There are also people who are never at the table. So people who are sleeping rough, people who are experiencing homelessness, people who are in prison, those people are never at the table. And I think we should be thinking more about that.
The sense of the kind of distinction between inclusion and access as well, be brought up, I think, with a really key points. In anybody else's work, we're seeing this kind of tension about meaningful inclusion moving beyond kind of tokenistic approaches to this type of work.
I think one of the things I would say that in Scotland's been better at than England is including organisations or representatives from organisations to help co-produce services, and the Scottish government has been things like the adult disability payment, co-constructed with co-constructed with organisations of disabled people, so it was much more involved, and I think that sort of form of inclusion and that form of it works relatively well within, or works better than it did in the past. So I think that is something to think that that's a good thing, and it maybe need to do more of it, and with more excluded groups to look at building that participation. But I also think that as well, I'm not saying that representation is enough, but having representation is important. And I think that when I talk to young disabled people, seeing visibly disabled politicians or television presenters and things, because helps they spend a lot of their youth being told, you can't do that, this is not for you, this is not for you, and then seeing people who can do it. So it's not to say it's not important. I agree that it's not enough, but it is a good thing to see representation of, and no matter how little it is, but seeing that representation is important and does help tackle. But I'm not saying that it's enough. We need more in there.
Certainly, I think there's a phrase that if you're not at the table, you're often on the menu as well. So I think that even just getting around the table often is that first step, more meaningful step of being included. We've actually surprisingly came to the end of our first session. That has flown by in no time at all. We're going to kind of continue some of these conversations in the second part of the roundtable discussion, where we're going to be speaking particularly about issues under the banner of polarisation and empathy. So we'll be speaking a little bit more about this kind of the challenge of polarized communities, a sense of kind of individualization, how that manifests in a variety of ways. But also trying to think about where do we go from here. So I was delighted there were some kind of practical, action-oriented ideas in that first discussion about what can we push for, promote ahead of the election next May, what sort of things work, and particularly around empathy, around emotion, around feeling, things we often don't speak enough about. How are these aspects of society really key to kind of responding to and pushing back against this period of polarization? So we'll take about 10 minutes, recharge your teas, coffees, and then we'll continue the conversation at about 4 p.m.
I'll send you around to Clemmy, who's actually Glasgow.
I suspect.
No, I'm like the next so like the more usually like involved in the outskirts of like not doing a lot of that for the tail end. We did that about really about and then do that paper with only 5 minutes of only that. Review, me, Chloe, and Anna Bailey, who's also the last third section engages in my collaborative and also just integrates a bit about PCP. I mean, not suspect, we're trying to suggest that these sort of stuff it's the older generation. Expected that procedural practically they are tables, right? And that could have been night actually. And the culture. That's why you were not getting
I know. The trick is a bit work.
It's a little bit. It's not, but it's great. You know, like when you so in the past. Say, this is the third country I'm sending in. You know, every time you start a new, and it's beginning, right? Because you don't know anybody, you don't know the country, you don't know people. And this one sort of made it easy to meet a lot of people. Like, and because it's so small, like, you know, you're around. Like this format, go to the pub, there will be some reviews of them.
It's quite ironic because it moved from
everyone's so excited.
the
Confidence.
It's quite anonymity.
This paper around in other localities understand the governance infrastructure that enables exactly. So anonymity, regulatory friends around. There's a lot more simulations also involved. Limited, right? Because Chicago, and I'm originally from Warsaw. So they're all like, Ottawa was the smallest, and that's over a million people.
Pretty small.
Yeah, and right. What was it like? Yeah.
That's a big.
Oh, like large.
Yeah.
I might email you in a bit to ask you about your experiences.
Okay.
Oh, right, shall we? But a little bit small place. Just because I never knew it. I have a small family and everybody is in Warsaw. So like,
always been in the city. I think we have like family to visit in a smaller place. But yeah, it's yeah. In fact, you're better off with an ally because like you can
Lecture articulate, yeah.
and so I specialize in interview relations and you do geo-interpretations. So I look a lot at social identity and how that then translates to their own groups and other groups. I've done some work, a little bit on polarisation, it's immigrants, a lot on nostalgia, and what makes people feel that, you know, things were better in the past and would be good to go back, and then what that does to like critical things in the present.
So you're not able to
I teach statistics. Which I think is usually wants to do lectures because that's the kind of a topic where people not very clear. Like there are some people that love it, but I think by and large don't know. So how do you advocate for it? There's not been it's done. You know. And it's both sides that came out of the research live. Yeah, it's not my when you know more. That was it all came down to January. The second year I'm teaching the whole course, and third year. So they're like like I know they like it. That's what it is.
Right. Mass transferable skills, isn't it? And I wonder, are they all social students?
It really is.
And it's because we are in a credit.
It is a big gap.
They have to take certain courses.
Really is.
Persevere.
So that's why it's a very good course. Yeah, it's going to grab some water.
Of course, yeah.
Yes, sorry.
Since there are many bases that you might be in Scotland.
Actually, it's 3.5 really response part.
So yeah, that was maybe more of
Yes, the person that's working before got his phone as soon as they did. Well, my colleague was there and she noticed. I haven't noticed, but she ran after. Yeah, so it's all good. Oh, okay.
You know, the name school.
Yeah.
Like, it could.
Yeah, like very far, far away. Or no, it was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're missing it because learn a lot of stuff and they
Didn't know.
Thank you so much.
I had met George earlier. I know he came to
got some law in it.
I said, all right. So I met George downstairs before and started. Because I'm hoping to get because of the referendum. Trying to get that to know you what is based on neighbourhood place based somebody ran out. Long time. James is around. But he's so he's on he's on the kind of big short chair. As far as I know, I know things.
I know this always looks the same to me, but I don't
Yeah.
know. I know you worked for Oliver on the project about Creek Anchors, I think. And it got really took Oliver to really well. He's a good colleague. He's a good just good work. I've got a lot of time for it because practice what free as well, you know.
Really.
So that is the guy, and it's nice to have very recruit thing with projects. So like long,
Really meeting, they all kept to order.
what's the word?
Right.
It's nice to write,
standing orders and this.
Yeah.
The course.
They're all online, and one of my members of Glasgow getting onto that course. I said, okay, and he did. It's all, so that was good. Yeah.
But it's been good
Boring.
having you.
You know her very well. I know she
Yeah.
was, but I didn't really know seeing all of the things.
Do you find it a bit stressful?
In this
We met with
I suppose it's fine, but it's just it would have been good. But
yeah, maybe if it's not, they want to minimize or something. There is, you know, important to one before. Right, just kind of looking from that a little bit back. You know, I apologize.
They're on. Fine, you'll be able to explain it.
Make it up. Men in prison in Argentina. Well, I couldn't go to any of the prison. Yeah. So I was able to speak to them online, and it was quite eye-opening for me. Because I just know.
You said he thinks.
Okay, we will restart the second session. Hopefully people are feeling refreshed after that short break. So we're back for the second part of our roundtable today, and our very kind of loose banner for this part of the discussion is from polarisation to empathy, kind of the broad descriptor. And we've been speaking about some of these themes already in the first part of the discussion today. But for my first question, I wanted to have a think about the idea of polarisation in particular. So we hear a lot about a polarised society, about this kind of gap, this distance between different parts of our communities, different parts of all that makes up Scotland. So I'm keen to hear from you, your experience and your kind of the work that you do. What do you see as the driving factors behind the social, political and economic polarisation? And how does it manifest in different parts of Scotland today? I'll give us a second or so to think about that, and I'm keen to hear your thoughts. On the massive topic of polarisation in Scotland right now. Is it a problem? I mean, maybe we're jumping the gun. Is polarisation?
Yeah, which is a problem because we've got old people pitted against young people. And I think we should have a lot more integration. I think we should have a lot more cooperation between the two because both can offer a lot. And I think it's a shame to sort of say that the old people are this and the young people are that. Why not bring them together? And I would vote for somebody who, let's have some integration. Let's take, for example, housing. There's a real shortage of housing for older people and a real shortage of housing for younger people. Why can we not have some exciting architect who designs a wonderful new town for older people, young people living together? And we can all help one another out. You know, if you look at the experience we've got, the background we've got, we could, you know, my husband, for example, is tutoring immigrants on how to do job interviews. We could give them all that sort of stuff, all that sort of information that we've got. And the young people could offer us, you know, here's dynamic young people still alive, still, you know, doing this, that and next to create some excitement in our life. So I think we need to bring them together.
I love that idea. And I also wonder whether anybody would disagree with that idea. It's such a fantastic opportunity.
No, but we're looking for people who are going to do something concrete.
Yeah.
Forever. When are we going to get the government to start building these housing?
Yeah, like what's stopping this from happening? What are the barriers that are stopping this intergenerational housing, these kind of opportunities? What
tradition? We're stuck in the old fuddy-duddy ways of doing things. We did this in the 1950s. Let's do it again in 2026. I think we need radical change. And I would vote for somebody who's going to give me radical change as long as he's not reform.
For me, I think one of the biggest causes of polarisation is poverty. And I think that that's what separates communities, and that's what separates. And if we want to tackle, you know, you look at people who are attracted to sort of anti-immigrant parties or to that, it's located around areas of poverty and people who felt left behind. And, you know, Falkirk, where you can see these communities are being left behind, and they got hit by the 2010 and then subsequent, they've just never caught back up to where they were. And I think if we, you know, it is a simple fact that, but then how do you tackle that poverty, and how do you bring, that's the key question, because I think to me, that's the cause of the polarisation. If we want to look at it, and we can go around at the edges of looking at how do we bring this community to that community, but actually it's poverty that's at the root of it.
So spotted Hayley, Liz and Mar, so we'll go with Hayley first.
I'm going to be slightly challenge what you said there, only because if we think of Reform as a right-wing party or a far-right or whatever language you want to tag on them, they're actually a real mixed bag of people, some being quite well-off Conservative voters. So they've scooped up the kind of right of the Conservative Party, or at least the leadership sits in that more elite space of policy ideas as well as contributors and leaders. Are they then using a certain polarising discourse to attract votes from underinvested localities? So I don't want to keep saying Falkirk, but that's exactly what we started with. And that's true. And I think part of the reason why people buy into this discourse, or at least believe it, is that people are feeling wealth inequality quite acutely and have done for a very long while. So we've had a prolonged cost of living crisis. There's been lots of policy failures to address the causes of why people's incomes are so low, why we can't afford the basics. We've had stagnated wages, we've got high youth unemployment levels. There's a whole heap of economic issues that have been polarising and have led to more inequality that's made vulnerable ground for this kind of discourse to thrive. And that isn't just a British thing, it's not a Scottish thing. You see it across Europe, you see it obviously in America, but there's if you watch the news, there's all these uprisings and different things going on, and it's a bigger issue than simply the fact that the working classes. I really begrudge the idea that all the working class are right wing. So I mean, now obviously I'm in a fancy room right now with a semi-fancy job because we're always at the threat of redundancy. I'm from a working class background, from a working class town, city officially, and with a family of working class people that were proactive in politics and engaged in issues around equality and inequality. And there's not a dearth of that conversation in working class places. Whether we've been having the same conversations as the middle classes and the upper classes, probably not all the time. But I think we've lost some of those spaces for those conversations, and people are feeling distant from Westminster politics and decision making. And I don't think there's been a very good job of communicating what is austerity? What has been the austerity project? Why is it still going on under a slightly different name? Who are the winners and losers, and why are you a loser in this game? And therefore, what politics do you need to engage in to make you more of a winner? And I think someone's offered people a very shorthand, persuasive argument that the way you become a winner again is this kind of polarising rhetoric about it. And that's not actually, and I think actually as academic here, maybe we've all partly failed as well, our institutions and our practices and professions. We do knowledge exchange, we have talks, we talk about unemployment all the time, I go to social policy conferences. I've not been to Working Men's Club and presented. I've not been to, and I could have done, right? And maybe I should have done, and maybe as a profession and others in this kind of field, the think tanks and others, are we actively include, I know this is online right now, but are we actively saying that these are conversations for everyone and not just for us? And in which case then facts and data and research become something that is shared, so people are less vulnerable to this sort of shorthand rhetoric and answers of really complex economic problems and debt and all these other things that are limiting policy choices and innovations. Yeah, so I think that's part of what is the polarising. I don't think it is just the working classes. There's an awful lot of middle class people that are part of the right wing reform movement and wealthy elites. It's just sort of pitched as these like angry working class people. I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's accurate.
Thank you. So we'll go, Liz, do you have a point?
Okay, I'm going to slightly take off my third age trust, but but slightly to do with it. Sometimes change is brought about by small little acts. And in my previous life, I was in education in Glasgow, always worked in Glasgow for 38 years. And one of the things that we did, and I don't know if anybody from Strathclyde is here, Strathclyde University, doesn't matter, and it was Strathclyde University Education Department. And one of the things we introduced, and it's about poverty, is intergenerational mentoring. And it was enabling young people to take access of all the contextual things that I was, if I'm mentoring a young person and they're in, a poor area, background, whatever, nobody in their family been to university, but they want to go to university or they want to get a good job, they want to do as well as possible at school, then somebody of our generation coming in and mentoring them maybe once a fortnight, not in a kind of patronising way, but just being alongside. And, I used to think, oh, they wouldn't like older people coming in, it'd be terrible. It was great, did it? I did it for a number of years when I was working in Springburn Academy, and that worked well. And now I'm on the other side, I'm the volunteer, and it's working with, because people are always ambitious, people always want better. But it's just knowing how to access that better, I think, is sometimes the complexity. And sometimes change is just brought about by small acts and small groups of people, not necessarily. I think the internet's really meant that Nigel Farage I get far too much airspace. But you know what I mean? Sometimes it's just these small things that makes a difference in individuals' lives. That's all.
That's very nice and very helpful. So I think that for me, polarization is being underpinned perhaps by like a sense of individualism that we're really struggling to come out of that mindset that, for instance, rights are like a finite resource, that if you gain what rights, I'll lose my own. So that's a very dangerous lie that I think has become kind of like, I believe, generally in society, that we need to try and challenge. The same way empathy, we wanted to talk a little bit about empathy as well. It's the same way, empathy is also not a resource that will run out. You don't need to feel empathy only for those people that are like you, or that you can relate to directly, or that you can really understand their experience. We should be able to promote empathy as something that, there's enough to go around, right? And we've got to understand that if we take Scotland and people as a collective, and that we will all be better off. So I think what Casey was saying earlier on of like, we're investing not necessarily in individuals, but in a community, in housing. We've mentioned housing a few times, right? If everyone has affordable, accessible housing, if everyone's well fed, if everyone's got like an occupation in a community that they're part of. So I guess, that's some of the thoughts on like, why is polarization thriving? What are the kind of like narratives that we can promote culturally in our different contexts to overcome it?
Thank you. And just in your answer there as well, you actually touched on some of the questions we've received from those joining us online. And one was around this idea of, how do we get past this idea that rights are either or? That me having more rights is taking away your rights. How do we move beyond that type of thinking? And linked to that, somebody else online has also explored the idea that, can we engage with people who have different views? And should we engage with people who have very different views? Is there a way to navigate the kind of barrier between people just writing them off as too different from my views? Or are there ways we can kind of cross these divides? So both on the point of polarization and then these questions online, can you hear if anybody has any reflections or thoughts on that?
So I think rights really is cultural shift. So from having worked on the Insecurity Act the past couple of years before it passed last year, which for the acronym is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the UK had ratified the NCRC in 1991, so we were already signed up to it. We should have already been doing the things in it, but it became legally enforceable through Scottish courts. But actually, the real change to the Act was never. It is about access to justice in courts, but actually, really, it's about that cultural shift and recognising that rights are inherent. They're everybody's business, and actually, everybody should know about them, know how to ensure that they're upheld. Competing rights absolutely do exist, but they're not the majority of circumstances, and actually it's interesting to have conversations about that where, for example, a parent's right might slightly conflict with what a child's wishes are, but that's okay. And as what we were expecting to see in this Parliament, but hopefully we will see in the next, is a human rights bill for Scotland, which incorporates a further 4 treaties plus the right to a healthy environment. And hopefully, when we see that come in, there'll be kind of a much broader cultural and cultural sort of cross Scotland discourse around what rights look like, what this legislation would mean for Scotland, and actually what it looks like if your rights aren't met, and doing something about it. Because I feel like people feel very disenfranchised with saying my rights aren't being met, and how do I do something about it? Because at the moment it's very difficult in a lot of cases. Also, on the point of polarisation, I think has to be mentioned. We've kind of touched a little bit on anti-immigration sentiment and racism. I think have been in a number of spaces the past couple of months where we talk about it as if racism's new in Scotland and as if it's a new concept. My granddad moved to Scotland from Mauritius in 1967, 1968, moved to Paisley, married a white woman from Paisley, and experienced a huge amount of racism. I mean, really quite challenging throughout his life, throughout my dad's life. I've experienced it throughout my life. It's not new. What we've seen is a shift in the narrative about it and the attention we give it. And yes, it has a significant increased media presence, but actually it's important to remember at the same time that this isn't new. We have used immigrants and people of other ethnicities as scapegoats for a very long time in the UK.
Yeah. So no, I think that's very interesting, because there is a kind of Scottish national imaginary of us as a progressive nation, and that's been something the last, in my field, criminal justice, the last sort of 50 years has been this kind of discourse of progressiveness, and yet underpinning that, or underneath that, is a lot of lack of policies that are not that progressive, and so we are one of the highest, we have had one of the highest imprisonment rates in Europe still, even though we profess to be this progressive nation and compassionate justice. And I think there are many things about Scottish society that we have not always faced up to, that we need to, and they are long-standing problems. And I think this notion of our national imaginary is also something about how do we describe ourselves as a nation, is also an important sort of story that we need to maybe remake now.
Certainly, ahead of election, this story, how do we imagine ourselves, the story we tell about ourselves, this kind of imagined nation, and whether that reflects reality of day-to-day life in all parts of Scotland. Yes.
So I think one thing we haven't really mentioned, and I think it's key in driving polarization, is social media. And the fact that once you start engaging with certain type of content, this is all you get. And then that will modify and solidify your opinions and also drive them in one direction or the other. And also to address the question about whether we should talk to people of different opinions, I strongly believe we should. And I think one of the issues we identify now is as the polarization problem is that people are no longer willing, because these identities that they adopt, whether it be right-wing or left-wing, become so entrenched and so strong that it is no longer, talking to another person, it is talking to a member of an outgroup. And then by default, you reject that because those opinions are in direct contradiction to what you believe is the only true thing, right? And this is sort of also where I think empathy, and in particular perspective taking, which is sort of the more cognitive aspect of empathy, which is being able to, you don't have to feel the same thing that other person is feeling, but you understand where you're coming from and why they may be saying the things that they do, which we've already expressed around the table here as well, by saying, okay, maybe, people who are experiencing, poverty, right? And who are looking for an explanation, right? It is an easy explanation. And then it's easier to understand that maybe that's this is not necessarily a bad person who has these opinions. It is a person who's in a difficult situation, and they found a fairly easy answer because somebody tells them that, it's easier to blame the immigrant than to understand that, maybe wealth distribution is becoming more unequal, and people who are better off are unwilling, say, to pay more taxes so that, everybody can benefit. So yeah, I think perspective taking is one of the things we can try to use to better engage with other points of view, and then maybe also try to see how we can come together as a community to address those issues.
Thank you. And thank you for picking up that question online about how can we engage others with very different viewpoints. I'm keen to hear if others have thoughts on that. Shafa.
I just want to say we cannot emphasize empathy if there's fear in the community. And this is what I've noticed from the media nowadays. Like, fear has been invested a lot against the others, which is the immigrants. And people are afraid. They have the right to be afraid. But because there is lack of positive evidence of what these migrants have been doing in the country, what's their contribution. So maybe the organization are more focused on the goal oriented, but there is a lot of lack of data there, what they have been doing, what's the good thing. So the people only see the negative side, which the politicians take us as a pit whenever there is a problem, blaming the weak group. So this is one of the problems. So we can emphasize only empathy when we can improve the news that's spreading around.
Thank you. I think such an important contribution, this idea that it's not a level playing field, this expectation that people are, the power imbalances between these different communities and different groups, an idea of fear and all these things which are kind of affecting the ability to be involved in these conversations. Does anyone else have any other thoughts, reflections on that? Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that point as well around, I think part of the question as well is how does empathy then translate into collective identities and collective action as well? Because I think sometimes empathy becomes a kind of end point in and of itself, and actually can be used as a kind of justifying vehicle for polarization. So often I think there's, people kind of say, I feel for this, a community different from themselves, but, in reflection of my own conditions. So I think in some ways empathy, I think it's quite a sometimes dangerously abstract term as well, in terms of how does that translate into concrete action. So that's my kind of hesitancy. I'm hopeful. I mean, I would hope for some sort of.
That's very helpful. Both of you brought the conversation into what I wanted to speak about was around this idea of kind of culture, feelings, emotion, empathy. Are these the answer to the problem of polarization, or is it part of a bigger kind of strategy? Do we need to be speaking more about emotion, more about feelings, more about how we relate to others? And in your work, have you kind of trialed any of these methods and seen success or not success in the work that you'll do?
Oh, there was lots of success, I think, in the U3A. And the members say, and we've got 3,000 members in Edinburgh, they say that the U3A has saved them. It saved them from loneliness. It saved them from sitting at home, just doing nothing and becoming depressed. It's given them a social network, which in old age is so important. And I think there's a lot of evidence to show that that social network is imperative for older people. You've got to keep active, you've got to keep meeting people, you've got to keep your brain alive. And the U3A works. It really does work to that extent. So like-minded people are being brought together and engaged, and they have a feeling of trust in the organisation and a feeling of it's giving me something I really need and really want.
For anyone familiar with unfamiliar with U3A, could you maybe say a brief few words?
We've been around for about 40-something years. We were founded by Michael Young
and Eric Midwinter.
Eric Midwinter has just died, and these were sociologists. And they retired and they thought, well, we're not ready to sort of retire yet. We're not ready to sort of sit in the armchair and knit socks. We still want to learn, we still want to engage, we still want to be active. And they formed the first U3A in Cambridge. I think it was Cambridge, wasn't it? Oxford, Cambridge, Oxford. And they thought it would just be a small organisation, but it's blossomed. We now have over 1,000 U3As throughout the country. We've got about, how many thousand members?
420,000.
420,000 members, and 3,000, they say, in Edinburgh. And it just is so successful because people are coming together and doing things that give a very rich, fulfilled third age. And it works.
And I suppose it's for the members, by the members, and that if I run a Spanish class, I don't get paid. Nobody who's a U3A person gets paid. So I run the Spanish class and people come along and, do you know what I mean? It's self-help, which I think is very important.
I think the self-help, yes, it's cooperative and self-help, very much self-help. But it's great. You've got, in my art group, I've got retired architect, I've got some professional artists, I've got people who've never drawn in their life before. And we all meet in a wonderful facility down North Edinburgh Arts Centre. Has anybody been down there? Brand new, beautiful facility with theatre, with music recording studios, with art studios. You've got the local community coming in for lunch, which costs about £2. And it's just, they come together and they share their experiences. They share their wealth of knowledge, which is what we have in abundance in the old age, and nobody recognises it, except for the U3A.
A real kind of clear connections, empathy across different communities. Nick?
I think there are similar models employed in other sectors with other groups. I think of the work of Glasgow Disability Alliance, for example, and their days that they run where groups of young disabled people come together, disabled people from ethnic minorities, disabled people who are refugees and asylum seekers, and share ideas. And it's not about doing art class, but it's about sharing experiences and coming together and talking and building friendships. So I think that is, to me, there's building communities of interest. And sometimes those communities of interest are built around communities of identity, and other times they're built around a shared interest. But again, that's, it goes back to, I think, Hayley's point that she made about having the resource to be able to participate. And these all cost resource to get to, getting to North, if you live in South Edinburgh, getting to North Edinburgh might be difficult. And so there's that ability to participate.
We have a group in South Edinburgh.
But you know what I mean? There is that. But in Glasgow Disability Alliance, it's one place, but they pay taxi. They have accessible taxis to bring all the members in who want to come in. So that's part of the funding. Is it paid because it recognises that disabled people cost a lot of money to travel, so they'll bring in people. And I think that's a part of that thing. It's about bringing communities together, but giving people the ability to come together is the key.
So I've seen both Mar and Leo. Mar,
I want to go for it. So I just wanted to share our model, which I think is very, very similar. And I do think the third sector has this down. Like, we know how to do co-design really well from the outset. So at the Young Women's Movement, we are created with young women. So we've got a variety of programs, class research plus policy work, and everything that we do starts and ends with young women. So we've got steering groups that we recruit freely online, mainly, or from our network of young women that want to be involved in a specific project, and they lead it from the beginning. So it's not this model in which you call them up and you ask us very specific questions, you bring them onto a room, you give them the time to explore and to tell you, this is what we think we should be looking into, this is what we should be striving for. And then from that moment onwards, they are driving the whole thing. And so it's true experience on change making, which is what I think that everyone at all ages and in all situations should be able to do. So yeah, that's our contribution, but I'm pretty sure that other organizations in the third sector know how to do this really, really well. And again, to highlight what they've already said, it is a resource that we're lacking, and the landscape is becoming more and more harder for us to provide everything that's needed, travel expenses, some incentives, lunches, and most important, have a strong team that's got stability and is able to do their jobs the best that they can. So yeah.
Thank you. And Leo.
We were talking in the break about arts and creativity and actually the role that they can play in discourse. And I think that's a really important one, because when you're talking to people about issues that feel really tense and difficult to talk about, and it's hard to connect with people, actually being able to do that through, whether it's through music or crafts or whatever it might be, is a really nice way of breaking down some of those barriers. And kind of, you don't have to be good at it. It doesn't have to be a masterpiece, but actually providing those safe spaces to have those conversations, it can be a much more conducive environment to having when you do have those kind of opposing views and breaking down some of those barriers and saying, well, we're actually working towards this is what I'm looking at and this is what we're working towards, and finding commonalities in that. I think it's easier than sitting two people down on seats across from each other and saying, well, what do you find something you agree on? Because that's not going to be the most productive.
As you said in the beginning, you said about empathy. It's like emotional. We cannot tell. It's not tangible, and we should like deal with it as a structure to actually make it like tangible. And I feel like if we prioritize creative spaces, like we prioritize libraries, we have like more open spaces to share experience and have more empathy between different communities, and then we can then translate it into data, and then people we can see what's the differences can make and how we can understand each other through these spaces. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. And my work is on data deification, metrics, quantification, and I do find that the challenge is how do we, if we're reporting to a funder, if we're applying for funding, how do we capture all of these amazing projects, initiatives, and turn it into numbers, turn it into kind of metrics, and that kind of gap between the two, something I struggle with in my work as well. Leslie?
Can I just bring Casey trying to get in?
Oh, no.
Then I'll come in.
Sure. No, I was just going to add from the think tank perspective how we are attempting to engage so-called experts of experience in all our research. So before we get into a project, we're going, how can we involve people who this issue directly affects, be focus groups, or I think Leah could maybe talk to this at the One Parent Family Scotland. We've been collaborating on a child maintenance project. We've had a single parent expert group, advisory group. So yeah, that's very much something that we in think tank space are thinking through and trying to apply in all our studies and work.
So I want to just pick up on the notion of empathy. And I was at an event yesterday in the university which was talking about the difference between empathy and compassion, which I thought was a subtle difference, but the compassion is also something that's really important because compassion acknowledges suffering. And when in my own field in criminal justice, I get slightly angsty when we start talking about emotions and all of this, because the emotional aspect of this is we punish. And actually what we need is data that seems to be, about what really is effective and try to make that less passionate. But on the other hand, we need to have compassion and understanding and emotional connection to people who have come into conflict with the law and we don't understand. And many of the young people that we work with in our research are people who have come from incredibly traumatic backgrounds. It's early trauma, coming from very deprived backgrounds, coming from families with violence, and they need our compassion. And so it's important to have emotion, but not emotion in this kind of field. And one of the things I think is, there was a very lovely quote from the 1944 edition of The Guardian about somebody was writing about how do you deal with young people who are, who have done terrible things. And he's talking about the fact that it's not so much the furniture in a youth services group, it's actually the workers themselves. And there's something about public service workers, as well as third sector, public service workers that need to be nurtured and supported, properly trained, well-resourced, equally third sector. And the real worry thing that for me, and listening to some of the things that have been said about third sector, is there's fantastic practice, but nobody is able to evaluate it properly because they don't have the resource to do that. And therefore, fantastic practice often disappears. And small things, small services often go because they can't demonstrate it's working. So there's all sorts of tensions around it.
I love that as well. And you were kind of picking up the thing about the small events alongside the resourcing, which has come up quite a lot.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise a question about how do we ask people who are experts of experience to talk about their experiences in a way that's not extractive or re-traumatizing them. So in my own experience, my own research working with migrant refugee women, it's always a balance, because in one sense, I want to give space and a platform for them to voice their experiences. At the same time, I, as a researcher, I'm gaining something from this, a PhD, a piece of work, et cetera, even if it's done for the benefit of the people that I'm trying to work with. There is that tension where I'm asking people to tell me about a difficult time in your life, and then I'll write it down, and then hopefully I'll do something good about it, but then you may not actually benefit from it. So I'd be curious to know if, if other people within these kind of situations or experiences have kind of suggestions or ideas, or how do we be empathetic and ask people to share experiences without being extractive? I think.
Thank you. And I'm very keen to hear, because I also struggle with that in my work around LGBTQ
exactly.
communities and communities which are very over-researched in some ways, tell like often very dramatic, harrowing stories. And Christina?
I was just thinking around what we were talking earlier about data and things, and a lot of policymaking is based on, it's kind of the gold standard of evidence-based policymaking, but a lot of it is very large quantitative data. And a lot of the nuance around emotion and empathy and what we're talking about here is something that you get at small scale through qualitative studies, through things like this. And there's maybe why some of the problems that some of the third sector organizations are facing is that they're working with smaller numbers. And it's a question then of like what gets prioritized in terms of what gets the attention and what gets prioritized basically. Yeah.
I think to come back to what Noam was talking about, and Casey touched on the piece of work that we've done about child maintenance, it's probably a really good example of how you do that well. So we know that for parents living for resident and non-resident parents, the child maintenance system doesn't work, isn't fit for purpose in the way that it needs to be. So what we did with this piece of work is that they were absolutely at the centre from the beginning. It's been about empowerment. I think that's probably,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we've worked with parents to design a system that's what they need, understanding the kind of very technical side, but also like the engagement around it has been with them. We've made sure that they have everything they need to do that. They've had support through our services. It's not been about extraction at all. It's about like, let's hold your hand while we walk through this together and actually make some meaningful change. And that's not easy. That takes a lot of resource and a lot of time. But actually, at the end of that, what we could have is a redesigned system and parents who can put their hand up and say, I was a part of that, but in a way that's really meaningful. And where that gets tricky is where you have a shorter term piece of work, or where you have something that doesn't have the kind of capacity to do that. But when you can do something like that, it's really quite powerful, and it gives people opportunities who might never have a similar opportunity to that in their life to do something that they can say, I'm really proud of what I've done here.
Anyway. And just to come back to the empathy of the street level workers kind of discussion, which I agree with, although there's probably like two issues, I guess, from our research for a long while has been, if street level workers can't change the structures and policies that they have to implement, right, and they're doing this with minimal resources, even being a nice person with empathy still won't stop the force of the policy hitting the person coming through the door. So if a job centre worker has to sanction someone, because that's the rule, that's officially the law, then being a nice person and empathetic won't lessen the sting that benefit conditionality will place on the individual. And then a second thing is a lot of my work at the moment is about the rise of digital interfaces in the delivery of the welfare state. So these are decisions that don't involve a human at the street level anymore. So actually, is the empathy about the street level, or is the empathy needed in upstream policy making? Is it the systems designers that are very far from some of the claimants that are coming through the door and the social issues that the designing services to support? Is it about the kind of elite policymakers? Like, I suppose it's a question rather than answer about here. It's like, when we think about where empathy needs to be and compassion and sympathy and things, I think a lot of street level workers probably have that because they're so close to people's social issues. But do the others that are less visible in the system? And is that the spaces that actually more investment needs to be made into? How do you get those software designers based in IBM, based in London, to design an interface for a social care recipient based in Aberdeenshire or wherever? I've just made those places up. But I think these are the kind of nitty gritty. If we're thinking about where you have to weave empathy into the system, it might not be always. It is sometimes the street level workers, but it's also those people with power that sit somewhere else.
Yeah, I love that idea. Where in the system we need more empathy, more emotion, more feeling for others. I'm going to kind of take us to, we're almost reaching the final stretch somewhat amazingly. We've got about 20 minutes left, and I want to kind of pose a really horrible question to you all. Hopefully it'll be interesting and exciting. I want you to imagine it's next May, it's the morning after the election, right? And you've woken up, you're the leader of the biggest party in Holyrood, man of Parliament. I want you to think, in the discussion we've had this afternoon, what kind of policy, programme or initiative is going to really bring about change? If you have the magic wands, money is no object, politics is no object, what's one thing, I told you it's a tough question, what one thing you think will really shift the dial in terms of the challenges we've spoken about today? It might be about polarisation, it might be about exclusion, it might be about lack of representation. What do you think politicians should be doing come next May to really shift the dial? I'll give you a few seconds to think about an answer. It's a tough one. Is there anything that will shift the dial? Yes.
I'm not sure about. I'm thinking about this. I'm not sure, but I think and I'm not criticising human rights-based approaches, which I think are very important. I'm not criticising the Human Rights Act, but I'd like to see more focus on equality, because I think there's, we've had the Self-Directed Support Scotland was 2014. It was a human rights-based approach to social care. It's made very little difference to the delivery of social care. Changes in the Mental Health Act in Scotland are framed around human rights, and it's not made it, research suggests it's not made that significant difference. And I think that there's a need to move back to saying it's actually inequality. You can say we've all got human rights, and then there's massive inequality that goes on above. We get those basic rights, and there's massive inequality that goes on above. And I think there's a need to start talking back to equality. And I don't mean equality of opportunity. I mean looking at equality of outcome, and looking back to saying it's about what are the ways that we do it. And I'm a big advocate of Amartya Sen's idea of capabilities. And I think it's looking at what are the capabilities that we need to give. We need to allow people to achieve that, but also what are the resources that we have to put in place to act as conversion factors to help people realise those capabilities and to turn them into ways that they change themselves. So I would think that a shift to a greater focus on equality rather than rights would be, I think, fine.
Thank you. I like that suggestion. Mark?
I don't think this will solve every problem, but invest in social infrastructure. Give us affordable housing, give us fair pay for all, give us free transport, give us the basics that we need to build upon after that.
So it's funding those fundamentals.
Yeah.
Shata.
I believe that we cannot repeat doing the same thing and expecting different results. So the infrastructure itself, whenever I go and see organizations, I see the board members, I see the ones who are doing the decision making. There is no varieties. There is youth that I cannot see youth people there, cannot see creative people, only the same minds, the same opinions. That's why we have the same output. But if we have more different varieties from migrant background, from creative background, from minority background, will actually have different opinion, different experience, and this would actually enrich the outcome. And this is when we solve the problem.
Yeah, and this sense of who's in the room, kind of making decisions, what kind of expertise and experience are we bringing to these conversations? Thank you. Yes.
I'm going to have to say a minimum income guarantee. So the minimum income guarantee looks at like a minimum standard of income that families need to have a not just the essentials, but like some quality of life. And I think because that comes not just from Social Security, but a balance of various income sources, I think if we ensured that everyone in Scotland had at least what their minimum level and the minimum income guarantee, we would address a lot of the issues we see, because people wouldn't feel so marginalised and like they were fighting against a system that wasn't working for them.
Like a real kind of clear programme there. Leslie?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I agree with everything that's been said, but I think that we probably haven't yet got over COVID, and that when we talk about inequalities, there's been a huge intensification of inequalities since then. And as I was saying earlier, there's a mental health issue that's massive in this country, and communities have really suffered and been over-policed. And I think there's so much that we have to do in order to be able to pick up the kind of issues that have arisen from that. And one of the things I would want to see a new government doing, and if I were in charge, I would be wanting to happen, is that actually different policy portfolios would work together. Because what happens, and certainly in my field, criminal justice, it's not a criminal justice. The best way of dealing with criminal justice is through health, through education, through the economy, through housing. All of those things are linked together, and we are not very good at working across government. And if we could get that right, things would be better.
I think education as well is important. I would invest in education. Education. Was it Tony Blair that said that? But I think the gifted for the curriculum for excellence was a fiasco. It wasn't funded. It wasn't resourced. I think COVID has had a dreadful effect on behaviour in schools. I really would invest in education and make sure it's education for 2020s, 2030s, 2080s, because I don't think we're teaching children what they really need. And we're sending far too many children up to do courses that really they're not fitted for. What about our plumbers and builders and designers and creative people? I don't think they're catered for. I lived in Norway for a while and the system there is superb. And even Italy has got a wonderful education system as well. I don't know why we don't look at other systems and take what's best from them. We're still stuck again, years ago, decades ago, when we first thought we were really good at education in Scotland. But I don't think we're doing a good job now.
Thank you. And again, just come back to what I said at the start of the meeting, sitting at this table and grandstanding, I do feel like the First Minister somewhat. It's great to hear all these amazing kind of policy suggestions and ideas. I want to say that the conversation today, it's been recorded, as we know, it's been streamed. After the discussion, the plan is for the RSC to take these insights, these ideas, these suggestions, and to turn them into a report or some kind of output from the discussion today. So I've got one more kind of question I want to kind of pose for everyone, and that's really an open-ended question. We've been here now for just under 2 hours. I'm sure many of you came today with some notes, some ideas, some things you wanted to get across in the conversation today. So I've left about 10 minutes at the end of our session, just for anything that you maybe thought would come up in discussion and hasn't, anything that you were burning to say and didn't quite have the chance, really to open the floor for you to say that. Before kind of opening the floor, I just want to ask, is there anything online that we need to kind of bring into the conversation at all?
All good.
All good. So yes, we have about 10 minutes left. So there's no real question or prompt here. It's just things which you thought might have come up. It might be about what we spoke in the first part of the day, or it might be about our topic in the second part. Any kind of closing remarks or concluding thoughts on the discussion we've had? Yes.
I suppose it's just that, we're still many months away at this point. I mean, not that many, but, we still have months to go until the election, and there are things we can do to engage these groups. The groups that we've talked about as not being engaged, and it isn't too late to do that. It isn't always easy to do that, but actually, I think it's really important that we do the best we can to engage as many people from as many different kinds of backgrounds and opinions as possible.
Thank you. I think it speaks to what you mentioned earlier. Haley spoke to me as well about the sense of being reflexive and power that many of us have at this table, whether it's in research, policy, in the third sector, the stuff that I could be doing between now and May to kind of help shift some of these conversations. Yes.
If I could talk about the religious elephant in the room, I think, so, my research is on Christianity, it's on migrant Christians, it's on Scottish nationalism and Christian nationalism as well. And I think when we're thinking about the future of Scotland, I think it's very important to remember that there is a religious element and a religious voice and a religious majority or minority that needs to be considered in some way. So my short-term research project that I did most recently, the Centre for Theology and Public Issues, looked at ethnic minority Christians and the ideas of Scottish belonging to the nation. And there was a very, very small sense in which they felt they weren't able to openly speak about their faith out of fear, out of desire to be respectful to other religions. And I think that poses quite interesting questions for when we talk about ideas around social cohesion, inclusion within politics. We know that, religious nationalism is on the rise. We know that it can be very harmful, very divisive. But at the same time, for the ethnic minority Christians I was looking at, when they faced experiences of racism, discrimination, which still persisted despite Scotland's image or self-understanding as a very welcoming country, they drew on their religious identity in order to find comfort, either with whether that's with ethnic minority churches that they went to, or a sense of greater belonging to the overall body of believers around the world. So I think religion is sometimes posited as a barrier to belonging, but actually I think in some of the research that I'm doing and others are doing as well, it can actually be utilized, if done well, as a way in which people can feel like they belong. So the Christians that I'm speaking to, they feel like they want to do well in Scotland. They want Scotland to do well. They care about Scotland. They participate in food banks. They participate in looking after members of the community. They welcome migrants in because they're motivated by their religious faith. And I think when we have these kind of conversations around Scotland's future and who gets to participate in Scotland, we do need to engage with the voices of religious people. Of course, the tension is then, when visions of what Scotland looks like that's motivated by religion counteracts with other ideas around equality and all that kind of stuff, which is something which I think actually just makes it more important that we need to have these kind of healthy dialogues and empathetic conversations.
Any other concluding thoughts or things which haven't kind of come up in the conversation so far? Wow.
Sorry, I've been speaking so much, guys. Sorry. I'm going to just end by going back to young women, which is who I came here to kind of represent and talking about representation. So I just want to say that young women are not just the future of Scotland, they are citizens of Scotland now, and we should be treating them as such. I also want to say that inclusion, like I said earlier, is about who's in the room, but not just about who's in the room. It's about whose futures are being invested in at the moment. And finally, just like a bit of hope for not just the run up to elections, but also after that we don't just come here and have like a really lovely conversation and goodbye and never see you again, but that we take these opportunities to build true alliances that are going to allow us to improve things, to work towards the things that we've all kind of discussed that we want to see, improving and being better. So I do hope that I see you all and that we can work together in the future as well, across sectors, public sector, academia, everyone, because that'll definitely make us stronger.
Very much agree. Sense of kind of, we've been speaking of polarisation, but also there's a need for the connections among all of us, the people in the organisation that you represent and work for.
Just one comment. I mean, also, while we are thinking about how to improve things, we also need to think about what we might